Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Andy Gustafson. I teach here at Creighton University. I teach business ethics. I've been here for 16 years. And this speaker series is part of a class called Business, Faith, and the Common Good. We do it every fall. And a number of the students are in that class. It's a seminar class, MBA and undergrad. And we bring in different speakers to come talk to us about how business and faith can go together, or business and the common good can go together. We've had 3 speakers already. We're on to our 4th today. So I'm really happy that you came here. Thanks for coming in. And so I'll tell you a little bit about our speaker. His name is Jim Anderson, and he's lived in Nebraska. He's also lived in Colorado. He lives right now in Virginia with his wife. And he works for a company that is the subsidiary that he works for. He actually started long ago and then sold it to the company. And it's out in Aurora and Lincoln, so here in Nebraska. He had lunch with them today. I've known Jim since I was 13. And I would go to him with my hard, difficult theological questions, which I had a lot of when I was 13 especially. And he would always help me think through those. So he knows a lot about his faith and about theology, but he's also been in business now for 30, 35 years. And so he brings a lot to the table. I think you'll find him to have some interesting insights. It's not like he goes out and gives talks all the time on his business. He's usually just doing business. So he's here tonight to share, and he's willing to do that. So Jim, thank you so much for coming and being with us tonight.
Good evening. I am Jim Anderson, and for the record, I'm interested in going to Las Vegas. Okay, so this evening I'm going to talk about stockholders, stakeholders, and the common good. So just as I am a person of faith, Christian, and faith has shaped me in many ways in business. You know, as a person of faith, yeah, that kind of shapes everything that you do. If you're a mathematician, you try to do really good math, but because you're a Christian, it kind of shapes your work habits and your personal habits, and that's also true in business for me. That my faith has shaped me and formed me, so I try to do business and do business well, but I am shaped in that way. I also want to talk a little bit this evening about how I think about shaping the company as an institution. It's not just a personal, how I function personally, but how I think every day and how I'm trying to structure the company as an institution. So I'm going to talk about stockholders, stakeholders, and the common good. You've probably heard all of those terms. I've read some things about them, but I'm not an academic. I'm going to talk basically about how I've used those ideas to try to shape an approach to the different groups in my business. And every part of that statement is easy to problematize and talk about, like, what is the common good? Especially in a pluralistic environment, what is the common good? For what community? Who decides what the common good is? Who is it? Who is it aimed at, or who benefits? Who is it defined for? But we're not going to talk about any of those things. I have a more modest discussion in mind, and it has to do with taking these ideas and contextualizing them to a particular situation. Myself as a manager and the particular company and companies that I've worked in. And I'm going to use the main company that I've worked in over the years. So I'm a middle manager. I started a company in 1990, and a year later it was bought out by a company in Omaha, a much bigger company. And eventually my partners and I ended up being merged into the larger software company that they had, and then I ended up as the general manager of that company for about 10 years before I went off and started another company. I am now back with that company. They invited me back in 2014, so I work with them in a different role, which I may talk about later. But I've spent most of my time as a middle manager. And I think it's really interesting to think about business and to think about how you make decisions in that position. So I wasn't a CEO, I was a general manager of a division, a software division, and I was responsible to stockholders. I was not an owner of the company. I sold my interest in my company to the other company, the larger company. So I was not a stockholder, I was a middle manager, so I had responsibilities to the shareholders of the company. And our company is privately held. If you are going to own shares in the company, you have to work in the company. And usually you're a general manager if you are a shareholder in the company. So I was responsible. I was a part of the group that was making decisions of the 16 divisions. I was part of the decision-making group that was making decisions for the company, but I was not one of the owners, and I was responsible to the owners. On the other hand, my division, our company, just pretty much let the general managers run their division the way they wanted to, as long as you made profit. And you know, revenue covers a multitude of sins. And as long as you're making money, you're pretty free to make choices about your division. So I had people working with me as associates, for me, with me, and so I had responsibility to them as well. And then I came later, kind of later in my career, to think more about the company as sharing in the common good of the communities that we were in. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm just going to talk historically about that, some of the stories out of that, to show you the tensions that, as a middle manager, you're trying to wrestle with. Now, I hope, you know, some of you probably, you want to be at the top of your company, but you may end up in middle management. Company could be, our company has 450 employees, so it's not a big company. Each division has, 30 to 60, somewhere in there. So I was the general manager of Software 4 from 1997 to 2005. And we were a company that we work in the point of sale business. So restaurants, grocery stores, C-stores, and we've written software for anything you can imagine in those kinds of contexts. For the last number of years, I've worked with large data center projects that do analytics on receipt data out of stores. So we put all of that in large data centers and process data for manufacturers and for all sorts of things. That's what our company did. In 2005, I left the company and went and started another company called Jackie Corp. And I did basically the same kind of work. I just did it for myself and a few other employees. And I did that until 2014. And then the company that I had left asked me to come back and work for the kid that I hired when he was 28. So I now work for him. He tells me what to do. And it's great. No P&L responsibility, no employees. Business is great. So that describes our company. That gives you the context. When I became the general manager of S4, we had to face ourselves. We were in Denver at that time, and our company was dysfunctional in almost every way that I could describe. We were losing money. There was continually changing directions. I don't know how many of you have worked in software companies, but that's like death to a software company when you're constantly changing your direction. We were changing product specs on the fly, no version control. We were selling vaporware to secure business. How many are familiar with vaporware? It's beautiful, isn't it? It secures business, but you have no idea how to deliver it, and it turns everyone's life to dirt. Okay? We were undervaluing stakeholder security, like salaries, benefits, participation in the decision-making of the company. And we had problems with stakeholders as well. We had our staff was unable to meet deadlines for one reason or another, lack of professional standards. I hope my company isn't listening to this, but it was lack of software. I mean, if you're going to be a software company, you need several kinds of software that help you develop software professionally, and we didn't have much of that for some reason. poor work habits. We had several what I would call programming divas, where they were, unfortunately I have to say, they were like fresh out of college, and we would hire them with computer science degrees, and they were divas. And they had a way of finishing product till it was about 80% done and then abandoning it because it got hard. And so I'll tell you what we did about that. And then we developed a complaint culture, and there was just too much effort wasted on vendors and customers. And actually at this time there was no real attention given to what the company might be doing for the common good. We were just trying to survive. So we had to face ourselves, and here's some of the things. And I was hired at this time and told to clean this mess up, and I didn't have very much time to do it, maybe a year. The year that I started, the year before, they had lost $750,000 and just in our division, and so it was kind of a mess. So we decided that we had to retool S4, retool the company. So we started reshaping the division and our whole division. So our office was in Denver. I closed it. I let most of our staff go. I simplified our product line, changed our revenue model to a SaaS model. Are you familiar with the SaaS model? Started transitioning to that in 1998, and we can talk about why we would do that. I fired some of our vendors, I dropped them, and then dropped some of our customers. The idea that customers are always right, is a really bad idea. Many customers, not many, some of your customers need to be fired and sent packing. And we did that. And I sound kind of like a hard-nosed guy, but I'm really not. And then we started working with the shareholder side of it, the stockholder side of it, because they were doing things like not reinvesting in the company, taking a lot of money out at the top. We're a sales-driven company. Nothing happens until something's sold, but sales was really proud of their effort, and they would take most of the money out. Management would take most of the money. The upper management owners would take a lot of the money out. They would not reinvest back into the people who were oftentimes making them successful, doing the work. The guy that's out there, if you sell a point-of-sale system, it has to be installed in the middle of the night. And sometimes it takes 36 hours. You're working to install one. You have people out there doing this after you sell something, maybe 3 weeks out of the month, and they're paid not much to do it because all the money is being taken out. So we were trying to work with that, kind of finding a fair distribution of the net profit achieved by the company, very top-heavy. We started selling what we could deliver today and formulating a process to basically, if you want something new, put it into a queue, we create versioning, and we deliver on a sane schedule. Now, why I say all these things, I think these mundane decisions that have to be made in a company have everything to do with who you are as a manager and how your faith shapes what you do because of your view of people and your view of processes, your view of what's important in life, all these things. Because all these mundane decisions, a simple decision about implementing a certain kind of software program to better track calls so that people don't have to, live in chaos, changes the quality of life for everybody in your company when you implement these plans. So some of these mundane decisions that are made may not seem like they're really connected to quality of life or enjoyment in your work or anything like that, but they have everything to do with it. And I think those kinds of decisions need to be carefully thought out and weighed because they really shape the institution of your company as an institution. And that shaping of the institution will have far longer effect on your workforce and on your stockholders than your own individual contribution to it. If you have the power to do those things, thinking about those decisions very carefully is really important. And we had to work hard to establish a new business culture at, by the way, how much time am I supposed to take?
3 hours.
Not the whole hour, but it'd be nice to have some question and answer here.
So do we want to do that in the middle?
No, you can do it towards the end. If you go to like quarter till or something.
Yeah, if you want to ask me a question as we're going, feel free to do that. It won't really throw me off at all. I'm just riffing. So we had to retool our division, and through that retooling, I think had some impact on the wider company, on the other 16 divisions, because everybody wanted to work for us. They wanted to leave their divisions and come over to ours. But so we had to reshape things, and we had to establish a new business culture in our division, which is really hard to do. Technology is easy to change. Changing the business culture of an entity is much, much harder than changing technology or introducing some gadget to do this or that. And so we had to establish a new culture. We started hiring a different sort of employee. So I just have to tell you, I would hire any of you out of college, but I stopped hiring people out of college, and I started looking for people who'd been around the block through a couple of other jobs, and maybe they were thinking about marriage or family, and they were looking for something a little more static or stable, that you could count on maybe 5 years or so of an investment. Because if somebody comes into your company and they're there for a year or two and then they're off to Google, it's good for them. It's not good for my company. And so we had to change, and we were interested in long-term hires. We do not hire short-term, and we don't hire contract employees. We really are careful about investigating who we're hiring, and once we hire them, they're part of our team. And to give you an idea, we had a guy retire this last week, and he'd been with us 30 years. And he'd been retrained and retooled several times, and he was still there. I can only think of one person in the last 15 years, that we've added on a few new people, but who was there over the last 15 years ago. I can only think of one person who's left our company. And part of it has to do with retooling the culture. And that has to do with who you hire. The team that we would form would have a much greater say in who was hired. Like, for instance, I have to make the final decision because I'm responsible for it, but I usually went to the team that the person was going to be working on, and I had them do the hire. And unless they were really off for some reason, I would ask questions then and really probe into it. But usually they would make their own hires and form their own teams because they knew what they needed, probably better than I did. We had good people, we hired good people, and that had its upside and its downside. I still remember the meeting we had. I used to pride myself in the fact that I could write code. And the programmers all got together and had a meeting and called me in and told me that they didn't want me to write another line of code in my entire life. And so it was really a freeing experience. It was disappointing to go home and realize you really suck at programming, but it freed me up to do what I was supposed to do in business. But we had really smart, good people that we just let them run with a lot of things. And that was a new approach. We had a new approach to compensation. So our company, if you're a general manager in our company, you're paid your salary, and then you're paid 15% of net profit. And so if you make $1 million, you get a $150,000 bonus. What do you do with it? Well, I decided I would distribute it across the people who actually, I took my share, but then distribute it across the employees who were basically making everything happen. And so there was this different compensation plan where I went to Denver and to Omaha because we were in a smaller venue, a smaller town, and I went by the standard salary rates for different programmers with different experience rates, different experiences, and then I added 2%, and that's what I aimed at for our people. Now, some of them were being paid. I inherited them, but they were being paid way below that. So every 6 months, it was $5,000 until we caught up. I was almost fired several times for doing that. You can imagine the stockholders not enjoying that experience. But if we were going to be a different kind of company where we valued the stockholder, you got to value the stockholder because there's no company if you don't, and they're investing their money and they need to have return. But at the same time, in our company, it was freighted upward, and the stakeholders who were investing their lives in the company were having, not such a great experience. So, different plans, different salary plans, different culture, different levels of transparency. Some companies control the company by the giving and the withholding of information, right? I mean, it's like that's how you stay in control of things. Some companies are like that, and when you have that, you immediately have a low trust company. You'll have low trust in a company that does that. So we tried to have a lot more transparency about what we were doing. Like if we had a couple of stockholders retiring in a year, we'd have to buy them out, their retirement out, because and it put stress on the company. And so we would just have to tell our employees, this year's going to be a stress while we take this hurdle. So maybe that's something you don't say to employees, but I wanted them to know that it wasn't like something they were doing, or we have a rough patch. Like there's just times like where business is tough. Another thing I found out, this is a mundane decision, okay, series of them. I started spending a lot more time on what are called DevOps. You know what DevOps are? It's like development operations, like developing software to eliminate unnecessary work. Like when we started out doing what we're doing with stores, where we're taking, every 15 minutes, we're taking all the receipts from all of the stores into our data center. And we have to monitor that, right? Because if for some reason it stops coming up, we have to know it and try to fix it. And so it was a kind of really a pain to try to keep up with all of that. So we started doing development ops where we just developed applications. We spent time developing applications that would pick all of that up and apply certain things. Like we would ask our people, what are the top 5 things that waste your time, that are frustrating and make your life miserable? And so we would isolate those, and then we would develop applications, have our programmers develop applications to eliminate that work, which made their lives a lot better. A mundane decision, but the quality of life of our employees goes up because we're eliminating a lot of stuff that really is tedious and makes their job, the quality of their job's not so great. So anyway, any questions so far? I mean, these are all just kind of like mundane decisions, and they all have to do with how do you balance out the interests of, say, stockholders who are also stakeholders in our company because they all work in the company. But how do you balance out the interests of those people and whom I know, and how do you balance that out with the stakeholders who are investing their lives in the company, and and we'll get to the common good. How do you balance those out? Because it's a zero-sum game. There's only so much money to go around, and when you take it from the stockholder and they don't get a dividend, or the value of the company doesn't increase in a year because you're investing in your employees, you see it's a constant tension, and you have to pay attention to all of those things. And as a middle manager, thinking well about those things, thinking carefully about those things, about the returns on investment for owners, and also the valuing the lives of the people who invest themselves in your company. That's a tension that takes careful thought. And I think, from my vantage point, I spend a lot of mornings getting up and thinking about, how to balance that stuff out. And I'll tell you, if I felt like I was like doing 51% okay, I was okay, because it's really hard to satisfy everybody in an environment like that. But I think as a person of faith, I have responsibility as a middle manager to all those groups that I just talked about, and taught me to pray, actually, do good business, but we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll leave that. What time did you say? Quarter till. I got 15 minutes. Okay. So let's talk about the company today. I mean, this took several years, right, to do these kinds of things, to think about these things. When I left the company in 2005, the person that took over for me is someone I hired when they were like 28 off of a tractor in western Nebraska. And today, he's actually much better at managing than I ever was. But mentoring him and developing him was a good thing. But I think he got many of these things that I'm talking about, because we thought about and talked about a lot of these things as we went through developing our company. Today, our company is really profitable. I mean, the team that I work with right now, we're probably netting, as a software company, on the products that we're doing, we're netting almost 40%. That's almost an impossible number to net 40%. And I think we have a healthy balance between, the stockholders benefit from that. They probably see most of that, but our employees have a better quality of life, and they have they have good salaries and good distributions at the end of the year. One of the most rewarding things for me as a middle manager is to see kids graduating from college who basically are the kids of the people who work in our company, because I've been at it for 30 years, so I've seen a lot of that. And one of the most rewarding things is to see how much good the company has done for those families. And it's an amazing thing. And we have, like I said before, we have little turnover, which in the tech industry is really unusual. And how many of you have worked in tech? How many of you want to work in tech? A few of you, yeah. So you'll see this, they say the best way to build your career in tech is to go out, get a job with a company like ours, work it for 2 or 3 years, and then apply for another job, leave the company, and you get a $5,000 bump, and you're off and running. That's probably what is the best path. Our company just started paying, when people wanted to leave, we would pay them the $5,000. So to kind of try to hold them. We have very little turnover. And I think that's an amazing thing for a company working in tech. I think the parent company today, I think the same things I've just said could be said about them. And I don't think it's necessarily what our division did. I think that was important. But what I've noticed is that I attribute most of this to an entirely new generation of general managers in our company that are all about 40, the next generation. Because our company is basically interested in building the company for the next generation. And to do that, and we like repeat customers, not always trying to find new business. but we're doing that. But we're always trying to keep customers that we have and build repeat business. And I think the new group, and I was talking to the general manager of S4 today, and he agrees that the new group of general managers, which are this next generation, and you're the next generation, just have a different take on business than when some of us entered into the fray. And I really encourage that. I think it's great. Our company is so much better because this new generation of leaders has taken over our company. And I just think these general managers manage in a much more equitable manner than my generation of managers. It just seems that way to me. In our company, I can't speak for business as a whole. Like I said, this is very contextual. But in our company, that is true. And half of them now are Catholic. And when I first became a general manager in our company, I shouldn't say this, but I wouldn't have thought anyone had any faith commitment at all. I shouldn't say that. That's bad. So let me talk a little bit about the common good, because I haven't said much about that, but there's a reason why I haven't said much about it. Because it oftentimes gets lost in all the stuff that I'm talking about. A company's conception of its contribution to the common good is sometimes just lost in the mix. And there's reasons why this happened. If you happen to be like, if you're in Lincoln, are you familiar with Spreetail or Huddle? These companies are big companies. And so it's easier for them to see how they affect the common good. They're doing internships, they're training all kinds of young people into the tech industry. You know, they pay their people and they have a good time, you know, in tech, and they're really successful companies. It's easy to see how they impact Lincoln because they have a lot of good, high-paying jobs that, you know, really, like I said, revenue covers a multitude of sins. And when these kids are a lot of them are young, are making money, they're establishing themselves early on in their careers, and that's being helped along by these bigger companies. Smaller companies have a harder time seeing the connection. We were in Denver, which is a big venue, and we were a smaller division, software division. It was very hard to see. You didn't even think about how you impacted the community. But I would argue that all companies do. All companies have a lot of power if they own it. A lot of companies can really work for the good if they approach it, if they desire to do that. I learned about the contribution to the common good when I moved the company from Denver to Aurora, Nebraska. How many of you know where Aurora, Nebraska is? Town of 4,000. Are you from there?
No, I'm from Waverly.
Waverly. Town of 4,000. And we're sitting there as a tech company that's paying a lot of money to its employees and than what you can typically get there. And immediately I became aware of how important our company was in the community. I think we were important in Denver too, I just didn't notice it. But if you moved into a small town, you notice it immediately. You know, you're providing good jobs, and it impacts family, it impacts, you know, all sorts of things, the families of those. But we also started involving ourselves in the community. Like, I think part of the common good is providing good product. And what I mean by good product is, if you're a software company, we weren't really interested that much in gadgets, like the newest thing, although we try to do that. We were more interested in providing ROI for our customers. Like if they bought our product, we could show them how it impacted them financially, how it saved them money or time. And so instead of just trying to sell them, oh, this is the newest upgrade to what you have, it won't make any difference to what you're actually doing, and you won't see any profit out of it, but you will have the newest thing. I'm not against that. If they want to spend that money, I'll take it. But I think far more important is for us to produce good product that actually makes a difference. There are a lot of things that aren't usually that are thought about now, a lot more, like environment, diversity, all of those kinds of things. Back when I started, they just were not. People didn't think in companies about what their responsibility was to those things, especially if you weren't a polluter. I mean, I'm making software. You know, how does that? But one of the biggest polluters, of course, is Google. Those big engines that are blowing out the back, things like that. I mean, they have to think about things like that, and all of us should think about what we do and contribute to different areas of the common good. What we did in our town, in Aurora, is I went down to the high school and asked them if they had any kids who were juniors or seniors or even sophomores that really had aptitude for technology, and kind of arrange with the high school where the students could arrange their class schedule so the last 2 hours of the day they could come work for our company. And we didn't really have that good a training program. I mean, I remember the first kid that came over, Matt Krause, who's now an engineer in Lincoln. I needed some stuff done with Red Hat Linux on talking to ports on a PC, which nobody had really done at that time. So I gave him a copy of Red Hat and a PC and put him in a room and told him to figure it out. And like 3 or 4 months later, he came out of there and he'd figured something out. And but we did it. And today, I argue, the reason I did those kinds of things is that in a software company, your major value is your intellectual property. And I didn't want my employees, basically, every time they had a problem, or the people in our company, every time they had a problem, they called Microsoft and get on the line and wait for somebody to answer the phone that really doesn't know what they're talking about until you get it high enough up in the ladder that you find somebody. So I basically said, you can find anything you want to know on Google. I don't want you doing that. I'll pay you to take a week to figure something out. And if you can do that, all of a sudden you know as much about Windows and what's underneath it as some of the people you would get at Microsoft. You've got to go up 2 or 3 levels to get to what we would, because we were a Microsoft shop, to get to what we knew. Pretty soon our customers were asking us about their network problems and their software problems and the things that were going wrong. And so he was only 16 and he was learning that. Now, later I've been chided about being so calloused to throw people to the dogs, but it was fun at the time. We had one kid who was so bored at school that, I mean, he'd go to computer classes and his teachers would be talking about stuff. And here's a kid who basically he was racing those small midget Formula One cars. He could take one apart, put it back together, and he was racing on a national scale, California and all this. And then he would go to school and be bored. And so he came to us and he flourished. He still didn't have that good of grades, but he got into the Kiewit Center here in Omaha, and now has his own software company that produces apps for mobile. He produces mobile applications and has done really well. And so I feel like those types of things were contributions to the common good. When we were in Lincoln, it was a little harder. We opened an office in Lincoln, and that's kind of where we're transitioning to. But there, I was kind of talking with a couple of the tech companies there about how do we create onboarding opportunities, on-ramps for the underemployed to get tech jobs. Because to get a good tech job and make decent money, you do not need to go to college. Now, if you're going to program or you want to be involved in business, that's something else. But you can support software and make a good wage, a lot more than you can make most other places, if somebody takes the time to basically give you an on-ramp into tech, if somebody's willing to take responsibility for training, et cetera, is willing to partner with, government agencies, nonprofit agencies, and things like that. Because then we were thinking about, okay, we have so many single moms that are working for $12 an hour. It'd be nice if they could make 30, if they could learn tech. But who's going to do it for them? Who's going to help them? Because it's very difficult for them to go back to college many times. What about, and I could just go on, I mean, these are things left for the next generation to do, because I left Lincoln. But, what about ex-cons? What about refugees and asylum seekers? Some of these people basically are doctors and CEOs in their companies in their countries of origin, and they come here and they're working at the hospital and janitorial service because there's no on-ramp for them into the work market. So how do we do that? I think these are the sort of things that companies, if they would band together, and tech companies especially have an opportunity to do this. If tech companies banded together to try to create something like this with a nonprofit group, I think there's all kinds of power that private companies or public companies have to really to solve some of these problems that are on us in for the common good. I'm just about ready to leave this. Did I leave enough time?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to talk a little bit about the best thing that I feel like I could give to my company as a well-formed person, myself, working on myself to think better about these areas. But I'm not going to say much about that.
Say a little bit more about that.
Well, as you can tell, I've been talking about business. I mean, I feel like I'm talking about matters that have come out of my struggle as a person of faith, as a Christian, working in a business environment. And I've had to think carefully about these areas. You could see where it would shape what I'm doing there. But I'm not like coming up with, I'm talking about mundane things that really are about business. The things I've been talking about, balancing out kind of these tensions between stockholders, stakeholders, and the common good, I think is good business. We should do it not just because I feel like it's a Christian thing to do, or it's I think it's good business as well, because oftentimes what is right and good is also, good business. But I found myself, I used to be a late nighter. As a college student, I was like, go to bed at 2, get up at 10. Anybody? Nobody does that here, I'm sure. When I started in business, I started running a company. All of a sudden, my whole life changed to where I started getting up at 5:30 and still do. And it was the only time that I could have to really, once I went to the company, all hell broke loose sometimes. And I could never get control of my day sometimes after that. But I started reading in the morning, doing daily prayer in the morning, building practices in my life that basically kind of helped me become a different person relationally. And I became more of a dependent person, on God and other people in my life, things like that. And these were what I call it practice-based formation. I don't know how to, kind of like gin all of that up, but I know how to put a practice in place. The first thing I do in the morning is, not read, put on coffee, and then read. And I personally read my Greek New Testament every morning. That's my practice, every morning. And then I'll go sit for a while, and I've got a little moleskin that has a list of all kinds of people that I think about and pray about, and some of them are in my company. And that's a practice. It changes you, I'm telling you. Just the practice changes you. Some days I don't feel like it does anything for me. Sometimes it, it's just a job. It's just something I do. But over time, it changes you. It changes how you do business. It changes how you relate to people. It changes everything. And so I think that's one of the things I wanted to leave you, that, you know, finding the practices. Like, I also think confession is a good practice, because I do a lot of stuff that needs confession, okay? But confession, a mentor is a good thing. I don't have one of those right now, but I did, you know, and mentors are important. There's all kinds of practices like that. Like, I attend worship every week. I invest in friendship every week. So it means I have 2 or 3 people that I, you know, on a rotating schedule that are on my calendar that I meet for coffee, just to touch base with and interact with. Don't know what's going to happen. There's no agenda, nothing. But those practices basically are there to help shape you and form you. And I think it shapes the way you do business. And I'll stop at that.
Any questions for Jim?
What do you think motivated your employees more, when you like paid them more, or like changing the people?
Well, pay doesn't hurt. But there's something more going on when you're willing to pay someone what they're worth. There's something about in them that says you know, the company recognizes that I have value, that I'm contributing to the success of this company. That's a huge thing, right? Rather than going in every day thinking, you know, I'm a cog in the wheel, I don't get paid what I should, and I'm looking for another job all the time. So I think pay does make a big difference. I also think quality of life makes a difference, because if you're making good money, like I hear at Amazon, you can make kind of decent money, but I hear, I'm not even going to say, I shouldn't pass any judgment, but I hear from friends that if you're a programmer, or it's not the greatest. And what I'm saying is you can get paid good money, but you become mercenary about it because it helps make the rest of your life good. Your life at work isn't good. So I think you have to work on both as a middle manager. I don't think, the reason we don't have turnover is not because people get paid so much. It's because they have a good quality of life and a good team to work with. They like each other. They like work, and they're productive, and we're successful, and they're a part of it.
Throughout your speech, I kept hearing the word mundane.
Yeah.
What virtue do you think you built most out of those mundane decisions?
Well, for one thing, you don't take for granted the decisions you make I call them mundane, but they're really not mundane. They really shape the institution that you're working in. And over time, it's just like what I've talked about personally, about putting practices in place that, if you have your stakeholders and you're not doing regular reviews, and they can never count on the fact that you're going to be systematic about that, or that you don't have a practice of doing that, eventually it won't be good. It won't end up well. You're better off putting a practice in place, whether you can give raises or not in a particular year. You're better off putting the practice in place. It's a mundane thing, but not to the people who are engaged in it. So some of those, sometimes we think that the best decisions are, this is such an ingenious product. Well, that may be true, but I can guarantee you that there are probably a whole bunch of things that are going to happen for that product to ever make it into the market and be successful. And most of the things that will make it successful are mundane.
What personal qualities do you look for in an employee?
You won't tell anybody if I say this, because I don't hire people anymore. The first thing is, do I like this person? Can I see myself spending any time with, if I'm going to spend the next 10 years with this person, I mean, isn't that terrible? They can be gifted, but I'm thinking after spending like 10 or 15 minutes, and again, I'm overridden by the other people in the team may love this person, they really like them, and I may be struggling. And so that's number one. I mean, that's bad, isn't it? But I think if many managers were honest, they would probably say that's at least a factor. The other thing I look for is, I'm listening. Well, first of all, I have to have a skill set, like that you need. But I always look for smart people who had good work ethics, because I feel like if you have smart people with good work ethics, they can basically learn how to do anything. Like most of the people sitting in this room, you can become whatever you want to be. You're smart, you have discipline, you can be pretty much what you want to be. Of course, you might end up at 40 as a lawyer thinking, my God, what did I do? I hate being a lawyer. Okay, but you have the talent to do it. Okay, but I just say that to say most people who are smart and work hard and have good work habits. I'm looking for that, and you can tell that basically, like, have you finished anything in your career? I mean, have you finished? That's the thing about college. I'm looking like, have they finished it? It's hard to get through college. Did they finish it? That's almost as important as how you did it. Now, if you're looking at a company that really wants really high achievement, which all of us want, but the other thing, there's a lot of intangibles, right? People who, if I'm hiring a programmer, I'm not looking for the most gregarious, talkative person, because my other engineers won't get anything done. It's a mundane thing. But I would love to have them in sales or in support maybe, or working with my customer base, great. But, somebody who can sit in front of their computer for like 5 hours and not blink is, worth their weight in gold. I'm not suggesting that any of you should develop that habit, but I don't know if that helps or not.
Do you have any advice on finding companies like this? Like, there has to be more than one company.
Well,
What should be?
I think if I were interviewing in a place, I would try to find a way to talk to somebody who works there, or you can tell a lot from managers or people who are interviewing you how they talk to you, if it's in a kind of a congenial and not in a collegial way instead of a condescending way. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I think you can tell from the mundane things. What's your salary things? What's your bonus structures, if there are any? I mean, do you have to work here 10 years to get there? What's your vacation pays like? Or there are mundane things that are important to ask about that tell you, how the ownership of the company views its stakeholders. So, but I would, just like managers talk to references, I think it's important, if you can, it's hard to do, to find people who actually work at this company and ask them, what their experience is. Our company doesn't hire that many people, so that is because we hire long term, and it takes a long time for them to die or retire. And I'm about to retire, so I guess there's an opening. So anyway, I'm on the downhill slide. So some of the things I've said, like I'm 67. Every year I think I'm going to retire, and then I renege at the end. And so some of the things I'm saying is I'm looking back on a lot of, if you talked to me when I was 35 or 40, I don't think I would have said half of these things. But if you're 67, you're looking back to say, okay, what did I really do well? what did I really value out of all of that? It's amazing what you come out with.
What's something in the last 35 years you look back and think, why did I waste so much time doing this?
It's not because I can't think of anything. It's, I'm trying to select which one of those things. I think I did a number of things that I would basically peg on exaggerated fears or unregulated desires, where I just would chase something because it brought something to me, like I need to come up with something. There are lots of things. Trying to please bad customers is a complete waste of time. That's one thing. And I spent a lot of time chasing customers that were big customers that promised revenue that I never made money on, and they were an absolute waste of time, and they just made my life difficult, and I should have gotten rid of them right away. Like I always tell my kids now are 44, 42, and 38, so it's not like they're kids. But I always tell them, look down the tunnel. If you have a customer or you have some situation look down the tunnel and see if you can see any resolution to this issue in the future, as far as you can see it out. If you can't see a resolution, make a decision now and get rid of it, because it won't change. That's one thing. You think of something else? There was a period of my life where I was chasing the image. So I bought my Mercedes and this and that. It was a complete waste of time.
Thanks, Jim.
Anyway, hope you all get something out of that.
Thank you all for coming out and spending the very beginning of your fall break with us. We appreciate that. Hope you have a great fall break, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks. Good night.
As long as they don't have a class on Fridays, it's technically next